and the moderator, Fatiah Touray, who is the Executive Director of the Office of Inclusion and Equity. So thank you so much for being here today. Enjoy the talk and take it away.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this evening where we're going to have the opportunity not only to have a dialogue, but to get some inspiration, to learn some new things. And one of the things that really touched me in learning about you, the band, is the ways in which you transcend boundaries, you amplify different voices, and the profound impact that your music has had in terms of activism. And so we're going to explore some of that today. And so Steve, Chandra, Savli, okay, names are important and we'll get to that, has been a driving force behind the Asian Dove Foundation. A band that has not only made remarkable music, but has used their platform to spark change, foster inclusivity, unite communities in the pursuit of racial justice. Over the course of the evening, so the conversation, just so you all know, we're going to explore some questions, and I just want to lay out a little bit of a foundation before I turn it over. So we're going to talk about the impact that their music has had, the ways in which they use their music as a platform, not only to foster intersectional coalition building, but also to connect different issues that we see transcend the globe and different issues that we talk about here, not just at NYU Abu Dhabi or just in the MENA region, but around the world. So issues from anti-immigrant discrimination to anti-Blackness to Islamophobia. What does ADF do in the context of the UK versus what they've done internationally with other artists? How do they incorporate principles of allyship and solidarity, things that we talk about, to address the vast Asian diaspora and the ways and the different challenges that they've had. Thank you so much, appreciate it. And talking about immigrants, whether they're first or second generations, and the ways in which we show up in different parts of the world. In addition, we'll talk about the different challenges in terms of sustaining these communities. We'll talk about the origins, your origin stories. We're excited about that. And I hope that you'll have the opportunity to share some insights into the making of the latest album. I think folks here want to hear about that. Am I right? Yeah, we want some insight into that. And so, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve. And you're going to start us off with a little treat, which I'm really excited about. And then you'll talk and address some of those questions, and then we'll come back. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we want to hear from you. So, how does that sound? All right, let's get going.
Oh, thanks for your introduction. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to see some faces from yesterday. Nice to see some others too. Thank you all for coming. Well, what I propose to do, I'm going to sort of lay out a few headings for you so we can try and sort of integrate our history into the kind of things that you want to discuss, Fatiah. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about a bit about the origins of the band and, importantly, the philosophy, the philosophical kind of origins, and some of our working principles. I'll try and explain that with some examples. And then I'll talk about some specific, I suppose in two categories, actual campaigns, social campaigns in Britain, and also some of the education work that we've done in other parts of the world, which do generally have a sort of, they tend to be finding common voices, people with common perspectives in different parts of the world, where music is at the centre for a kind of sense of social change and empowerment. So that's how we're going to do this.
Okay.
Let's hope it works. Right, okay, I'm going to start off with a song now. This song, it's my personal favourite Asian Dub Foundation song. There was, during the 70s and 80s, there was a television programme. It was listed in the BBC Times as for Asian viewers. And, but the actual title was Naya Zindagi, Naya Jivan, which is, in both Hindu and Urdu, it means sort of new way, but it could also mean new way, new life. And that's the name of this song. And the first line is, every Sunday morning in front of the TV, recording with a microphone. Naya Zindagi. But what my father used to do, he'd have a cassette recorder with an external microphone, press record and play, and everyone in the room, shh, we're recording. Right? And the tapes that he made, the cassettes that he made from this TV show, formed the basis of the main melodic motif in the song. Right? I took that and I played it on a kind of cross between a harmonium and a synthesizer sound. That became the basis of the song. It's got pretty much all the elements we've ever used in Asian Dub Foundation. It's like a reggae pop song in some ways. It's also got the beat of the music that when we started was really, really the most exciting in Britain, called jungle. It's got a reggae bass line. It's even got a sort of slightly guitar poppy thing, even a bit of psychedelic pop in it. But it actually talks about the struggles of the South Asian community in Britain. So I'll play you a bit of that. I think that pretty much has every element of the name, actually. The dub element is there. That is the reggae bass line, which which is a brilliant bass line that Aniruddha Das wrote over the keyboards and chords that I put together. And it's even got a half speed where it drops down and becomes quite pure reggae in the middle of it. And the Asian Foundation is there, you see, the harmonium. Also a fantastic set of lyrics written by young Dida there and Aniruddha, the bass player. So every Sunday morning I explain that bit. Basically it's a respect to the first generation of immigrants that came to Britain. We give a shout out then to another Asian artist who was actually #1 in the charts, a guy called Tajinder Singh, who was in a group called Corner Shop, and also had a lot of success in Britain, so we give him a big up there. Tajinder on the radio, this is England's new voice. Censorship for years, but now they have no choice. This was like, there was a lot of immigrant communities in Britain, it was a sense of, we don't want you in the mainstream. We want you over there, your Bhangra parties, or on your 4 Asian viewers, you see, or as the butt of our humour, and also as the victims of our physical attacks, okay? So this is it, you know, running through the playground, we never could have known that in the future our role models would be homegrown. So this is a great celebration of a real moving forward of a community. So we're running in the street with a brand new pride, springing our step with our heads held high. Now this is interesting, we're supposed to be cool and in the dance our rhythms rule. This is a slight snidey remark about the sudden media interest in the new musicians of South Asian background, and it became a kind of media category called the Asian Underground, right? Which you might come across if you're doing cultural studies. There's probably been more theses written on this than record sport, actually. So certainly in our case, but you'll find that that's commonly referred to as a historical thing. Now we were very close to the people that ran it. The great Sweetie Kapoor, who started the wonderful club Anoka, which was a vehicle for the tabla player Talvin Singh. Now we actually played at Anoka right in the early days, and I played with Talvin, all of that stuff. It was a beautiful burgeoning scene. It was highly original, and eventually it did become quite fashionable. We knew it all along because our parents made us strong. Never abandoned our culture, just been moving it along. Now, that's a very important thing for us, I think. See, there are many ways, I mean, this feeds into quite contemporary arguments about cultural appropriation, you know. What is culture? How do you define it? How sacrosanct is it? Should it be? When is it right to combine it with other things, or, you know? And that's a big argument, obviously, but it does have a lot of resonance for us, certainly when we started. New heroines and heroes in the battle we belong. When we reach the glass ceiling, we will blow it sky high. You're not aware of the glass ceiling. There's only so far that certain groups, ethnic minorities or people on the outside, can get before there's an unseen, unspoken glass ceiling. I think that's a very powerful line that Aniruddha wrote there. When we reach the glass ceiling, we'll blow it sky high. Unfortunately, we haven't quite done that yet. We're working on it. Sorry?
Talk about that.
The glass ceiling, well, I mean, it's basic addresses discrimination in employment, discrimination in access. I mean, we were very angry about, we were getting so many people along to our gigs. Everyone was talking about us, but record companies were coming like, oh, God, this. I mean, it's like, what is this? And we don't want this. This is not for us. All this kind of stuff. We saw it in the music business terms. Also, you know, certain things like, well, why am I not being promoted?
Right.
Why didn't I get onto this? Why didn't I get onto that? Etc. Etc. The usual things about racism, institutional racism. Really, that's what it is. The glass ceiling. It's just another term for institutional racism, set to a pretty tune. Stayed and we fought, now the future's open wide. Here we go. So that's kind of sets out the stall for Asian Dub Foundation, the dynamic behind us, you know, I guess. Okay, slideshow. Let's put that one in. Okay. Now, when we're talking about categories like, you know, uniting communities for racial justice or militant unity or things like that, one thing that's quite difficult to get over sometimes is, for us, it's music first. Now, that might seem, oh, you know, a lot of journalists particularly, and some academics, has to be said, sort of tend to see, oh, you're in this group, but you're doing political, social things. Right, so music's over there, that's over there. And that's understandable because a lot of academics, a lot of journalists aren't musicians. But what I'm trying to get over to is that actually we believe that the social actions that we do, the campaigns we do, all flow from a particular philosophy about the music. I've put a Ponzi name there, praxis. You know, there's certain working principles. There's certain working principles that evolved in the band, but they all change through practice. Either you find out what you're doing by doing it. That's a good definition of praxis, I think. So we had these working principles, things that we believed in passionately, and also a particular set of ideas that we got from a very interesting person that I'll talk about now. So the beginnings, well, the group was actually set up as an educational workshop, and then it became a group out of that workshop to play anti-racist benefits. Right? So the education philosophy and principle, and I have to say I'm very grateful to to the university here for allowing us to do that again yesterday, right? You know, and we haven't done it for a while, and I'm glad to say that this has reignited our interest in this dimension of the band, so very happy about that. But it does have roots in something perhaps a little bit unlikely. The organisation where this happened was something called Community Music, which was set up in the early 80s by an avant-garde jazz musician. I don't know if you're aware of avant-garde jazz, or free jazz, as it's called. It's a very abstract, extremely noisy version of jazz without any structure, without any, it literally is what it says, free jazz. It's experimental jazz music. And this group of jazz musicians was an interesting bunch of people. It was people who were radicalised by the events of May 1968 and that general era. You know about that? This is when it referred to a kind of student uprising in Paris, but also to a whole new set of ideas concerning feminism, anti-racism, environmentalism, all kinds of flowering of ideas that happened post-1968. Well, this filtered through to the free jazz scene in London. Right? We're talking about a guy called John Stevens, who, you know, he did actually play for people like John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who's in that kind of, you know, context. But he had this revelation that, you know, okay, we can make all that. I was going to play you some. There's not much time, but basically, it's crazy music. Okay, if you don't know that music, I'm a fan. But look up free jazz if you want to know more about it. Basically, he said, well, this really isn't talking to anybody. Okay, it's radical to us. It's subversive in terms of kind of jazz musical theory, but what use is it if we're going to try to change society, right? And so here we go. We've got avant-garde jazz. Now, the booklet that he came up with is something called Search and Reflect. This is basically a booklet that basically allows you to do certain kind of music exercises, no matter where you are, who you're talking to. You can get everyone to play music, right? So it's a totally egalitarian form of music tuition. You don't have to have had any music experience before. You don't need to have had... You could be any kind of person. You don't even have to speak the same language as the next person that you're doing the music with. And he basically came up with a booklet with a whole load of fascinating exercises that we used in Asian Dub Foundation to get us tight, particularly around getting us tight around the beat and signals, you know, how long a piece should be. I mean, methods that were open to anyone who was interested. You don't have to have any musical lessons at all, you know. So it was a real way of egalitarianism in music. So so you can see where we're coming from there. We've actually been given tools to encourage egalitarianism in music participation. And you could see how a group like Asian Dub Foundation, even though we don't sound anything like free jazz music, how we could actually build on that. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. And there was a wider thing. Music as a metaphor for a perfect society. It's a very simple idea. If something's working in a group, if a piece of music is working amongst a group, particularly of diverse people, it's like everyone is listening to everyone else, but everyone is always expressing themselves individually. So it's that resolution between the collective and the individual. Right? So that's the kind of philosophy that we kind of grew into, and it was a big influence. It certainly changed my life. I did the course there, and I did very well at it, despite having, I don't have any music theory training or anything like that, but I was always very enthusiastic, very expressive. And I found that this was rewarded. And I came out with a qualification, a music qualification, that I would be able to take music workshops and get people to do things. And this was my early experience in simultaneously with the band and teaching at the same time. I'll tell you a bit more about that later. And later we actually came up with our own version of this called ADFED, ADF Education. All right, not for the coffee table. This is a heading. This talks about the ADF attitude. You know, it has to be said, the way that South Asian culture is viewed in Britain, there is quite a long tradition of a kind of high-class version of it. See what I mean? Where, I mean, I was brought up on Indian classical music. I'm not making a critique of the music at all. I'm talking about where it kind of sits in, say, British culture, in arts culture. There's a certain Indian classical music has sort of worked its way into the highbrow appreciation sort of circles, you see. And so I'm just trying, I'm not criticising that at all, but we're coming from somewhere different. I mean, there's people, good friends of mine like Nitin Sawhney and something like that, who are really, really amazing musicians, but they operate in this kind of quite high virtuoso establishment sort of world. That's not our world and never has been. That's why I say it's not for the coffee table, you know. This is, and I'll tell you more about that. Okay, now here's an example. I think I mentioned this to those of you in the workshop yesterday, where the previously voiceless are given a voice. We believe you get great music. This isn't an exercise in social work, or saying, oh, we'll get them off the streets just playing music. No. We actually believe that if you give people the tools for expression who have never had those tools before, you're going to get great music. Right? And that experience, and we were taking like samplers, drum machines, quite accessible technology, what was then accessible technology, into youth clubs, into schools, into deprived areas. One particular example that I gave yesterday was I went into a place called the Asian Action Group, which was in a very rough part of town, a place called Turnpike Lane. There were heroin was being dealt on the green in front of the youth club and in full view of the police. And basically I took a sampler in, a drum machine, we made some loops. Jungle was the music of this inner city community. It was tearing up inner city communities, playgrounds, all over Britain. And it was the same time that the British music press was pushing something called Britpop, which was white boys with guitars playing 60s music. So you can see there was a real kind of like a dualism of musical energy. And we were definitely on the first side. And I took it in and we made a jungle track. And, you know, I was showing them how to do it, and once they got a loop in time, everyone was dancing and jumping like crazy. And then they said, okay, look, we need a lyric. I mean, look, I want you to tell me something about your lives. Find something. And there was a cartoon on the wall, and there was a courtroom scene, and there was a judge, and there was like 3 or 4 young Asians in the dock, and it said it had the judge saying, oh, all you Asians look the same. And one of the kids said, Judge, say all Asians look the same. So I had a group of about 15 like teenagers going, Judge, say all Asians look the same, to a jungle beat with a heavy bass line. It was really one of the most exciting things in my life, you know. And this is the thing that kind of really informed the early Asian Dub Foundation's music and attitude. You know. So, celebration of, yeah, we're not a fusion group, you know, that's what I was talking about, with the more kind of highbrow jazz fusion with Indian classical music. That's not what we do, though we obviously like all of that music. We celebrate what we call folk experimentation. That's not a great term, and folk's not folk music, but it's actually when people get hold of technology and experiment with it, and it's not connected to universities or intellects or anything like that. It's actually literally grassroots experimentation. And really, probably the most influential form of that was dub reggae. Basically, people reshaping the sound. Dub reggae gave us the MC, it gave us the remix, right? By basically feeding reggae tracks in and reshaping them using effects, dropouts, and turning the producer into an active musician. So that's an example of that. That was obviously a big influence. Yeah, I mean, there's a few other things there that were very influential. Our own experience, the older musicians, punk, post-punk, and acid house, which has a strong DIY, do-it-yourself element. But basically, you know, just that drive to make music. You pick up a second hand, something you can't afford it, you pick up something second hand. You go around to people's houses, you set up, you know, house parties or what have you. You do it yourself. You get your record out yourself. You know, this was the great thing that the punk revolution gave to Britain. Whatever the music, not really talking about the music, the attitude. You can do it yourself. It doesn't matter about marketing, demographic, or any of that stuff. Just do it and get out there. You know, very simple but very effective. Changed British music, and it went through punk, post-punk, acid house, to jungle, to the sound systems. All owe a lot to that philosophy. And we were very inspired by that. We were inspired by a reggae musician in Britain called Linton Kwesi Johnson, who was part of something called the Race Today Collective, which was an anti-racist organisation. We were very inspired by Sivanandan, who was a great Marxist theorist, Institute of Race Relations. We even did a track where he's talking on one of our tracks, talking about colonialism, actually. Yeah, and let's go to the next one. Okay. Oh, you want to see more music, right?
I think they do too.
Yeah, okay.
And we can leave it in and
yeah, which one is that? Oh, yeah, well this is a bit of a Sivanandan.
The power line is the poverty line.
Yeah.
Today, the color line is the power line, is the poverty line.
He was about 75 when he did this.
Racism and imperialism work in tandem, and poverty is a handmaid. Those who are poor and powerless to break out of their poverty are also those who by and large are non-white, non-Western, third world.
quite long. I mean, basically it's a lecture set to music. And he's brilliant. John Pandit recorded him. I wish I had time to play the whole track, but he actually started singing in the interview, right? And when I came to put the words to the music, the singing, he didn't hear the music. He didn't hear the music at all. The singing was perfectly in time and in tune with the track. Yeah, I should find it. Shall I find it? You want to hear it? It's incredible. In the middle of the lecture, the guy starts singing.
Today, there is no such thing as illegal immigrants, only illegal governments.
You get the picture. I mean, he died not long after that, so that's one. And that's actually a quite popular track we did. People used to use it on marches and stuff. You know, so it was quite simple. Okay, so this was something that this was an aid. We had a lot of kind of like these working principles we had in kind of catchphrases that just came about sort of naturally. And this was a line from a song on our first album called Jericho. I mean, you're multicultural, we're anti-racist. Now, I mean, that could be a whole debate for the whole class, but we're not going to do that, okay? But I mean, there's very different versions of what multicultural is. But I think for us, it was like, you know, it's not just about saying, well, this is your culture, and that's your culture, and we all happy clappy sing along, you know. It's actually about, if we really want a truly multicultural society, we're going to have to fight the racism that prevents it. And it shouldn't, don't think we're solving anything by a kind of bureaucratic diktat, you see what I mean? By kind of just saying, oh yeah, okay, well here's your bit over here, right? Here's your bit over here, now all be happy, you know what I mean? And we'll pay sort of like, sometimes people who set themselves up as so-called community leaders or representatives, they get nice jobs, you know? So, you know, that's necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't solve the bigger problem, I think. You know? Okay, so there's quite a lot here. Yeah, one thing we grew up with is what I call the hippie cliche. And this was very big, and a lot of contemporary musicians at the time were pushing this. Not us. I mean, there's an example of actually a band who were quite good, a lot of good records, but we played with them once, and they're basically a bunch of old white guys sitting cross-legged, playing sitars with joss sticks, and we were on after them, and it's like they had to apologise and say, "I'm sorry, we're not the Asian Dub Foundation, but we really want to show you about the meditative quality of this music." And then we come on, and it's kind of like, oh my God, it's like, what's gone on here? This is an explosion. This is sort of angry, confrontational music. You know, you're not supposed to be like this. You're supposed to be peaceful. You're supposed to be spiritual.
Right.
You're supposed to be all these things that we saw when we got into the Beatles and they went and the Maharishi Yogi and got ripped off and what have you. You know, you're supposed to be like my holiday in Goa. Right. We had people come up and say this. I wasn't expecting this, you know. You know, it's like, and these were people who considered themselves liberal and sort of interested in exotic culture. You see that word that we use there, anti-exoticism. This is what we call exoticism, just taking and faking what's easy. No respect for the roots, right? Which is a line from one of our songs, Box. See me, hear me, but still you try to box me in. You think you know my mind by the colour of my skin. That's an early Asian Dub Foundation track.
Can you, before you move on
Yeah.
to that, just
you know, I mean, it's still around in a way, in some ways. It really was not expected for a group of young South Asians to be confrontational, and to actually talk about growing up in Britain. I mean, that's another thing. We were talking about the grassroots sort of street reality. Now that's something that's not in Britain, right? So for a start, you know, the South Asian community was considered outliers, not integrating, the language barrier and difficulty, the cultural differences and food and dress that were on a daily basis pilloried, especially in comedy, television comedy. You just turn on the television and there were whole loads of programs which were just making fun of you in a deeply aggressive and offensive way. And that's not to mention no-go areas. I mean, I never used to go to many, I was so into music, but I never went to many gigs because it was dangerous, you know. So, you know, and of course the political side, the far right were very strong in the late 70s. And all of us, there's not one South Asian in my generation and beyond actually, that had not had at least one kind of run-in with the foot soldiers of the far right. Skinheads particularly. I remember being chased by and I'm knocked out, concussed in my first week at college, all this kind of stuff. You know. So, but you see, for a lot of people, that was not really something associated with magical India. You see,
No.
you see, that's really what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Yeah.
And that was associated with other communities in Britain at the time, in the
Yes, of
Black
course.
Brits.
Absolutely, yeah. So there was actually quite a lot of crossover, and a lot of solidarity.
Yes.
But there, you know, I don't want to get too much into that, but that is actually slightly contested in some ways, you know, because in a way, yeah, I mean, anti-racism was largely more about the black community being there longer, and obviously the great musical forces of punk rock and reggae coming together. We as a community, as people of a similar background, we were slightly later, and we had more to kind of get over, I guess. But it came out differently, I think. But yeah, of course, I mean, here's an interesting thing there. The older members of Asian Dub Foundation, when I first met them, I was amazed. John Pandit, Oni Ritterdas. We all read the same books, and we were all into Kwesi Johnson, Race Today. But the book we all read was Seize the Time by Bobby Seale, which was the Black Panthers. We were all big fans of the Black Panthers, big fans of reggae, of Gil Scott-Heron, the great radical Afro-American poet. So culturally, certainly on the political, social side, we were drawing from radical Black America, particularly, and radical Black Jamaica in London. You see what I mean? So yeah, there was obviously, you know, it was a big inspiration for us. You know? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think I will play some. Here's an interesting, the de-Gandhification of South Asian history, right? There's this in the film Gandhi. The one that always really annoyed us was the line that said, "We want them to leave as friends," right? You know, Gandhi talking about the British colonials, right? And we couldn't stand this, right? And so probably one of our first records was a track called Naxalite, which was, we were really inspired, not that we were necessarily supporting this group, it's very complex. This was a revolutionary Maoist group that was in different parts of India and still are. Right? But they were not pacifists, they were not passive resistance, they were basically peasants taking up arms against landlords, right? And we thought, wow, this is great, you know. I'm going to play a bit of that. Some of these videos are a bit gnarly, they're getting a bit old, but you get it.
It's okay.
This is actually taken, this is a film that a Japanese record company made. This was our first ever gig in Japan, actually.
This one's for Naxalites. Brothers and
it was, I mean, Gandhi, there was a quote from Gandhi that the Indian people are a mass of sleeping villages. So the line was a mass of sleeping villages. That's how they're pitching it. At least that's what they try to pretend. But check out a history so rich and revolutionary, a prophecy that we will rise again. So, you see what I mean? We're trying to reorientate the histories, you know, to diversify up the history, if you like. Because there was all kinds of forces involved in the anti-colonial struggle. It's a very complex one. It wasn't just like, well, the British made some mistakes, sorry, you know, but we came round because of that wonderful Gandhi man who left and we're all friends, you know, which was the narrative that pretty much everyone believed in. A lot of people still do. You know? But, you know, so that was definitely one of our many kind of working principles. Get out of this. Yeah. Technology is our tradition. Now, this was a big thing for us. This is like, we believed in technology, right? Now, I think this is interesting because this is perhaps a stereotype that's gone, right? In a way, we've got other stereotypes, like a lot of South Asians are kind of tech geeks, and, you know what I mean? But this was before that. The idea of a backward nation, you know, this really offended us, you know, given the very long history of science and philosophy, mathematics, but also we used a lot of Indian electronic music technology that people never knew about. There are tabla drum machines, there are Indian sequencers, there are fantastic shruti boxes which imitate the tambura. We use that all over our music, unashamedly. And we believed in drum machines, we believed in sampling. And still by that time, I mean it's not now, but there was resistance to that. That's not real music, this kind of stuff. So we embraced it and pushed it, jumped on it and, you know, threw it in people's faces, you know. The problem of world music, now this was the thing. I already talked about you know, playing with white groups that were sort of pushing the hippie thing. We believed there was a big problem with world music. The term, as you can imagine, is very problematic. It was quite big in the 80s and 90s. We had this feeling that what would happen is that the kind of liberal establishment in the music business would get groups, largely from West Africa and from other countries, and then they would take them into the studio and clean them up. Here you go, third world person. Here's a 32-channel mixing desk. Here's all these wonderful digital, much better sounds than yours, you know. And we can make you sound modern and get you in the charts, you know what I mean? But that was completely missing the point. What we tried to do is what we took was the energy of the raw energy of the grassroots of the music. Right? I mean, a good example was the great Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. You know him, the Qawwali music, which I was brought up on. I didn't even know about it. Didn't even know what it was that was being played until much later. But I was a huge fan. We did a remix of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and the reviews were interesting because we were either considered the best track or the worst track. We were actually considered, well, these guys have actually got the energy of Nusrat Fateh Ali. Nusrat Fateh is alive, he's an incredibly exciting performer. But when it got into the studios, they would always be like a little bit clean and a little bit pristine and stuff. You see Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, he's a ball of fire and sweat. And so that's what we came into. I could play you a bit of that, I don't know, have we got time for that? You want to hear a bit of our version of Nusrat's song? Yeah, okay.
Audience, please.
If it loads. Oh, it doesn't seem to want to load. Okay. We'll come back to that. I will give you a blast of that. Okay, right, now this is the last thing I put on, the last bit of I put here. Racist police, and this was a big problem. The police being on the side of the far right, and the direct anti-racist action. I mean, this is a very important part of Asian Dub Foundation's history. Let me just put that full screen. Yeah, so I won't go into it too much, but the Tower Hamlets 9 Defence Campaign. In 8 September 1993, a racist gang attacked 17-year-old Quddus Ali, who was walking with friends past the pub. His friends managed to escape, but Quddus was set upon and severely beaten. There was a vigil outside the hospital. And the police, alongside the right-wing British National Party, attacked the vigil. And a lot of young Asians were arrested. Right? And this was the Tower Hamlets 9. Now, the first Asian Dub Foundation concert was a benefit.
Oh, right.
Yeah, for the Tower Hamlets 9. Now I'm going to play a bit of that. Oh, come on.
Touray.
Not yet. Okay. Just to note, this was weird, right? We got very big in France. Right? At the time when the National Front were rising in France, we did a concert and it spread. And it was like, here was a band that were actually saying, you know, what we're saying. So we became, in Britain it was very hard for us to get gigs and noticed on the radio, but we went very big in France and we were on national television. This was in front of 5 million viewers. And we're playing this track about a very aggressive track, you know, attacking police, racism, and attacking the far right. So I think what I'll do is I'll zip it forward a bit so you get the sense. Salient kind of anti-police campaigns that were going on. The Quddus Ali was one, but also the very famous Stephen Lawrence case was alluded to there in that song. And so that's very much a statement of the early days. So I just wanted, I know we want to get to questions, but I just want to tell you a couple of things. I'm just going to give you a list really of some of the things that we went on to do after that. The Free Satpal Ram campaign was a campaign that we heard about Satpal's case. He was attacked in a restaurant by racists and he went down for 17 years. And we made a record about that and it just took off, and that's what made us in Britain, right? Totally unexpectedly, unplanned. A lot of famous musicians, people like Radiohead, Primal Scream, all got involved in the campaign. And Satpal was eventually released early. So another thing we did is, you can all look these tracks up, Free Satpal Ram. Maybe at the end of time I'll play them. Yeah.
We can take a deeper dive into one of the campaigns, but I think as we've heard about the extraordinary work that you've been doing beyond the coalition building and thinking a little bit about the ways in which, you know, you being part of this collective, right? You being one of the oldest, not oldest in age. I don't want to say.
Well, I am now, actually.
Okay,
or am
so
I?
you are.
No, I'm not actually.
You're
there is one
not.
older than me.
But one of the longest standing
Yes,
members.
I am the longest.
The longest standing member. Something that we do here at NYU Abu Dhabi, at least that I do with the first to start with this in the beginning is to learn a little bit more about our histories. We ask people not about where they're from, but about the story of their names, right?
Okay.
And so I wanted our audience to have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about you. So telling us a little bit about the legacy of your name, but then also if you can talk about the legacy of the name of Asian Dove Foundation. And
Okay.
I think from there we'll then move to talk a little bit about the new album, and then we want to hear from you all. Okay? So why don't we hear a little bit about the story of your name?
Okay, well I'm mixed. So my mother is sort of working class white English and my dad was from Hyderabad and his mother tongue was Marathi. So Savli is a Marathi name, but no one seems to know what it means. But my middle name, Chandra, is often referred to as moon. I think in a general term it means heavenly body. But basically I was a space kid. So it actually I was obsessed with space as a kid. You know, and that actually was my route into music. And also science fiction, I think, for a lot of ethnic minorities in Britain was a real escape. The only time that we saw black and Asian people in positions of authority and whatever was on science fiction programs. Right? Star Trek was always, there was one called UFO that I was a huge fan of, where you had black women in purple wigs running moon base, you know. This was a big thing. So science fiction, so I was always really happy to be called Chandra. And there is the Chandra Observatory out there. It's actually associated with Indian astronomy. You know, so that's a very big part of me. You know, the astral, more the less down to earth stuff.
And about the name of the group?
Well, the group was literally made. John Pandit made it up literally a couple of days before the Qudus Ali benefit.
Okay.
And the idea was to encourage young Asians to get involved in the anti-racist action and to come to the workshops. So it had such a grassroots kind of origin, because nobody expected ADF to become an actual, well, dare I say, a commercial success in Japan and France particularly, but also Britain for quite a long time, you know, to the point where we were playing the main stage at Glastonbury. I mean, the Japanese one was Japan's Glastonbury Festival, Fuji Rock. And we played some very, very big stages. I think our biggest show was in front of 700,000 people. Yeah, that was in Poland. You know, so I mean, it did get far bigger than it was ever supposed to be. You know? And it went to so many places that we never thought we'd get. But not just the band as a successful music thing, we brought the education thing too. So we did projects with Roma people in Budapest. That was the first one we did. We hooked up with similar groups with an education musical route in the favelas in Brazil, with the Touray people in Mali. That was a separate thing I did, but it was still very related. And a lot of what we've done is still around the theme of immigration and immigrants and refugees. And we released a record with a comedian 2 years ago, which hit #1 on a lot of charts, the day that Britain left the European Union. And it was a parody, a send-up of anti-immigrant rhetoric, right? By a comedian that we set to music, and it was our biggest song for years. So that was 2021. So, you know, we've been making this kind of impact, saying what we're saying for, you know, nearly 30 years, and it can still make a mark. And a lot of people told me they were very cheered up by that record. And we raised money for the Kent Refugee Action Network, which is right at the cutting edge of the refugee issue in Britain.
And so the last thing I'll ask you before we open it up to the audience, and kind of keeping along with the theme of the names.
Yeah.
So your latest album is Access Denied.
Yeah, it's not that. It's COVID and lockdown made it seem newer than it actually is.
But talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the name, and a little bit more about how you're continuing on this legacy of not just activism through music, but also the education building that
Yeah, well, to be honest, I mean, this trip has reignited the education dimension. We're very happy because we've got a young rapper called Black Chronicle who has really just joined us. And it's part of an ongoing tradition to get younger MCs and musicians involved, you know. And what's great about it is they come into this already established group with a lot of the ideas that I've talked about today, but they get their own interpretation of it. And we learn as much from them, you know. As I think some of you came to the workshop yesterday and heard Kron do his thing, you'll understand what I mean. You know, he was able to take what we've been talking about, reinterpret it in his own way, reflect it back. And that's been a really great thing. It was really good to do it. That was his first ever workshop with the band yesterday. And it's the first time we've done it for a long time, you know. So that was really important. Sorry, I forgot the rest of the question. Yeah, access denied. Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. We didn't intend to do what they used to call a concept album. But 70% of the tracks are about immigration, borders, refugees, and the term access denied and the passport photos on the front. Now, there were so many tracks about that. There was one song called Swarm, which was, I was deeply offended by something that British politicians always do. When they want to get a rise, they say, we can't have this swarm of immigrants coming in, right, you know, really cheap. And all governments have done it, Labour and Conservative alike, you know. And I was then watching a nature programme, and it was a programme about the swarm in nature. And it's like the swarm is the most powerful collective force in nature. Certain birds and insects come together and they react 10 times the speed of thought, you know. And I just thought, yeah, right on, swarm. We're proud to be a swarm. This is a symbol of collective power. So we kind of tried to undermine the negative nature of the language. So that was one thing. We did a collaboration with a wonderful group who you should get over here, I think. 47 Soul, they're called. They're a group of Palestinian exiles.
Yeah.
You know them?
Their UAE debut is here.
They've been here, right? Ah, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, we love those. Oh, man. But here's the thing, like, we said, look, we'd love to do a track with you. And they said, yeah, okay. So we came over, we had a jam, great. It's okay, we'll finish it off in a couple of weeks. Oh, no, we can't, because we've got to go back to Jordan for 6 months because of our visa issues. So basically, literally got them the day before they came back, went to Jordan. But, you know, sometimes they've gone to, like, Belgium, for example, 4-piece, and they had to do it as a 2-piece because of I mean, I know the tour manager, and it's like, that is probably the most difficult group on the planet to tour manage, but also the most rewarding band to tour manage for, you know. So, I mean, that was great. And the track was all about borders, you know, getting around borders. What's the problem? We're human, man. You know, simple track, but what a great vibe. Asia Double and Asia 47 Soul together, a wonderful group. Absolutely, it really does. And if you see a show, you'll get it. You know, it's very theatrical as well. I think one of them, Waleed, was actually a theatre director. So there's a theatrical aspect to what they do, which is very interesting.
Wonderful. Yeah. So why don't we now turn it over to you all? Do we have any questions from the audience about some of the themes that you heard? Anything that you want Steve to expand upon?
I've got a question. Yeah, so I'll call you Chandra because you like it, right?
I do like it very much, yeah.
So you've been through the transition of the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested in your perspective. Has the scene changed in the sense of, is the system getting healthier and better, or is it getting worse?
Are you talking about the music scene, or when you mean scene, or you just mean the general kind of political, social environment?
Two-sided coin.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Well, music, it's hard to say because, I I mean, we were off a time and a moment. We expanded so far and so wide. In a way, Asian Dub Foundation is now what Asian Dub Foundation does. You know, though again, I'm happy to say that some of our original founding ideals, I think, have found quite a lot of expression this week, which I'm very happy about. So I find it difficult to make commentary on a whole picture. It's a very complex question. If you're talking about the nature of, say, racism, and I mean, it has got a lot more complicated, I think, right? A lot more complicated. You know, I mean, even being called Asian Dub Foundation doesn't make much sense now. You know, there are so many divisions, bifurcations, and different social groups now. In fact, we did do a song called Zigzag Nation once. It's like, growing up in the 70s, it was, are you racist or anti-racist, right? And it was basically white racists versus all black, brown, whoever, right? And it was simple, you know, once it was obvious who was on that side, who was on that side. But now it's more of a zigzag nation where all these jagged lines are cutting people up, you know. Like class, you know, I mean, class has changed, I'd say, in the South Asian community, for example. There's really obvious class differences distributed amongst subgroups, you know. So Bangladeshis and Pakistanis generally tend to be the most deprived, and then the Gujaratis, etc., are doing very well, you know. And so there's that aspect to it, which is difficult and problematic. There's also, yeah, I mean, this can get pretty heavy. You know, where I live in Peckham, there was an incident just last week where a lot of the local businesses are owned by Lebanese and South Asians, and the local Nigerian and Jamaican community feel very badly treated. There's been protests against them, right? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. This is what I'm saying. It's very complicated, very difficult, you know. But then you've got the more general anti-refugee hatred, and they are the Conservative government. That's all they've got. The only thing they've got that could get them elected again is to blame everybody coming in on small boats for the most powerless people on earth for all the problems in Britain. You know, right? It's cheap, but it works because of our electoral system, because of being able to switch the blame. You know. So, and there we've got the rise of the far right, which I think, you see, it's a great question really, because there's other factors that have come in. The rise of the internet has changed things a lot. It's changed politics. It's changed politics. You know, certain ideas are allowed to grow and fester. That wouldn't have been before, you know. So we have the kind of, you know, the spectacle of Trump and Brexit or what have you. And I must say it's very dispiriting that we're having to talk about very basic issues of immigration, refugee, and racism in such a basic way now that it does feel like everything has changed, but the fundamental problem appears to be unsolved. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it paints a picture.
Yeah.
We have more good work to be done.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
in a way, I mean, you know, a lot of the good work, unfortunately, has been undone. You know.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you for this talk. I mean, partly because you have been around for, what, 30 odd years?
Yeah, 30
Very
years.
tempting to keep asking you for hindsight.
Well, no, fair. I just hope I can give you it.
So
Yeah.
two questions then.
Okay.
I mean, one is, for a group that's been around for 3 decades or more, what are your current inspirations? I mean, what are the current challenges? I mean, so it's one thing for new groups, you know.
Yeah.
You think they're off their time, but you have this peculiar problem of were you ahead of your time then, and how do you remain relevant today?
That's a really great question, and one we've actually been finding an answer to. Not that we looked, because you see, if if you think about stuff like that too much, you won't find the answer. But I found that a lot of music being made on my doorstep, despite its terrible reputation, which is somewhat deserved, I found a lot of inspiration in the sounds of music coming out of South London, which is often referred to as the UK drill scene. Right? Right? Now, I mean, like any great music form, it is totally caused the moral panic. Right? Which itself is a very, there's a lot to say about that. Like right now, and this is terrifying, right, I find, there are people being convicted on the basis of their lyrics in drill tracks. That's being presented as evidence in court, right? As if it's something new for music to reflect violence, right? Right? So, I'm not necessarily inspired by what they're singing about, but I'm inspired by the actual musical territory, which I think has broken new ground. And Crom, the guy at Black Chronicle who was talking yesterday, is in the group. He knows that scene. And so we're kind of like making new sounds. We did a bit in the workshop yesterday, which is, we're not doing that kind of music, but I've found a way to incorporate some of its more interesting elements, right? And I'm very excited about that, you know? So on an artistic front, we've actually, I believe, we've solved that problem. But I have to be honest and say, in the wider kind of business side of it, trying something new, even though that's something we've always done, it doesn't necessarily fit into the plan, you know. So that's a big challenge, a big artistic challenge is, firstly, where do we go without being boring and repeating ourselves and what have you? Well, I think we've solved that. But the thing is now, does the wider kind of world that we're in, are they going to allow us to do that? And will it be accepted? Are we a group, as was certainly the case in some parts of Europe, for example, where we represented their teenage years, and I want to hear it relived, right? That's an excellent question, and that's the central artistic question that we've been dealing with for the past year. Right? But I'll tell you, I'm very positive, because I thought, yeah, we're just doing the same thing. We've run out of ideas. Then all of a sudden, something happened. Certain technological advancements allowed me to get into this music that I found very exciting, and is really at the cutting edge socially as well. You know, I mean, I could talk about that for a while, because I think it's, you know, in a way, it's like somehow or other, Mick Jagger gets an OBE for writing lyrics that are about cutting. I don't even want to say. Right? I don't even want to say what some of the Rolling Stones lyrics are about. They get an OBE, but a young black kid from South London can be put in prison for writing the same lyrics now, right? There's a whole subgenre of country and western called outlaw music, which is all about shooting people, you know? Yeah, and yet, you know, there's nothing new about street violence being associated with new music forms. It goes right back to rock and roll and probably before, you know? So, sorry, did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just have 10,000 more questions.
Oh, I'm here. You throw them. You'll get an answer. Problem is there might be 10,000 word answers.
But, I mean, sorry.
No.
Okay.
I think we had one. You can go ahead, and then I think we'll take one more question, which is you, because I see you're like, should I not? And I think you absolutely should. So do you want to ask your follow-up, and then we'll end here?
Well, it's just that, you know, say for instance a term like community music.
Yes.
That was in your.
Yes.
I mean, you know, yeah, and you had word music there, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so obviously there's some kind of antithesis or, you
Yeah.
know, something there that you're asking us to think about. But that was 30 years ago.
It was, yes.
35, right? What does community mean today? I mean, just in the context of what you were describing just now in response to this.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. I think a lot of these terms, I mean, I'm talking about the origins. I wouldn't use it now. Do you know what I mean? I mean, community music. Community doesn't mean anything, but in 1981 it did. You know, it's true. I mean, some of the words that, you know, you're talking about intersectionality and
Right.
these are words that didn't exist. Like when we talked about anti-exoticism, we're really talking about an aspect of a more recent debate about cultural appropriation. But we didn't have those terms then. See, so I think there is a lot of stuff that's relevant. Certainly the idea that music from the grassroots, which is really saying something and being musically innovative at the same time, that's always going to be the case. It just might not be called community music. You know? But it's true. I mean, language is a bit of a trap with these things a lot of the time. I reckon in about 5 or 6 years' time, we probably won't be using cultural appropriation or intersectionality. You know, they would be almost like, diversity. I mean, the term diversity has been killed by being, in Britain anyway, I don't know about here, but in Britain by corporate human resources programs. You know what I mean? It's like that, where diversity is it's just so meaningless now.
And
you know?
it's evolved. Even the word multiculturalism, you don't see it used as much.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the ways in which the words and the language of inclusion has evolved from being purely compliance to being then, multiculturalism, then you see diversity, then you see diversity and inclusion, and then you see diversity, equity, inclusion, and now we use the terminology of belonging. And so it's constantly evolving, so that's a wonderful point. And so I am going to give you the last word, because I think you got this. So ask your question. No pressure.
I'm thinking about, the particular line, I don't remember which song, but it's like being put in boxes. Right?
Oh yeah.
And I don't stand for this, but this is like something that I've heard. Is, especially in, right now there's a moment of, it's almost cool to stand for an identity. Right?
Yeah, okay, yeah. I see where you're heading.
Yeah, and it's just, this is left me confused, but I'm curious what your stake has been, which is, in standing for something, often the question that's brought back is, where are you from, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of bringing that question back, even though you're standing and proud of it, and it's something you almost had to do. But if you're reproducing that question, right, like, how do you relate to that?
Yeah, that is a really complicated, but excellent question, and one that I grapple with, and almost like my mind wants to shut off.
Could you paraphrase it a little, because you couldn't really hear it back.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, it's asking about, I think, a general comment on identity politics, is it? And about this need to actually say, well, I have this identity, and I need to express it. And the next stage is, well, I make certain demands because of this identity. I think it can get very complicated and confusing. I think identity is important. Of course it is. I mean, we're called Asian Dub Foundation. Why did we need to do that? Because we needed to not just express our identity, we needed to own our identity. If you look earlier, in the earlier sort of ideas that we were kicking against,
Right.
That was actually trying to own our identity and redefine our identity, to kick out associations with the identity that we didn't want, okay? But it's a great question. Once you've done that, where next? Okay? What's the next stage? Is it that you actually unite with other people to make a general improvement in society? So whatever identity you are, you don't have to go out and own it and go out and kick against a version of it. That to me is the next stage. But where we are now can be that the identity can be promoted at the expense of other identities and can become a kind of form of bureaucratic progression up the ladder. You see what I mean? And this is the bureaucratization of anti-race and of identity politics. You see, and that's where, I tend to say class has to come into this, because you could push your identity no matter what it is, but if you've got $1 million in the bank and if you haven't, right, there's a big difference in identity that won't be expressed in identity, if you see what I mean. There is actually a class and economic difference, which I tend to think gets drowned out by identity. Basically, my analysis is bound up in class and economics as much as it is culture. And I think identity politics tends to just focus on culture and it doesn't look at the wider economic structures. Right? So to me, it's impossible that we can all be equal no matter what. While we have a system, well, capitalism, if you like, whatever you want to call it, no matter how hard you push with an identity, you're going to come up with that basic inequality because of the economic system we have. Yeah? Does that answer you? Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
And with that being said, we want to thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I think you'll stick around a little bit.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Talk
Yeah,
to
for sure.
folks
Yeah,
and mix
yeah.
and mingle.
Yeah.
But I think we'll close out for now. So thank you to the Arts Center at NYU Abu Dhabi for always putting these on.
Yeah.